In 1986, Ruby Doss was discovered strangled in Spokane's East Sprague area in Washington, leaving investigators with a cold case that seemed destined to remain unsolved. Over the years, the similarities between her case and a series of other unsolved slayings led to numerous false leads and ends. It appeared that justice for Ruby might never come, until a breakthrough in an unrelated crime unexpectedly brought new evidence to light, reigniting the search for her perpetrator. Ruby J. Doss was a 27-year-old woman living in Spokane, Washington in 1986. Originally from Detroit, Ruby had moved to Spokane seeking new opportunities and a fresh start. Before the crime that would take her life, Ruby had been struggling with various personal hardships, including economic difficulties. To make ends meet, she worked as an escort, a choice that placed her at increased risk in a world already fraught with danger. Despite these hardships, Ruby remained hopeful and resilient, trying to build a better future for herself and her children. Tragically, those dreams would never be fulfilled. On the rainy evening of January 30th, 1986, Ruby J. Doss's life came to a tragic end. Ruby was last seen in the East Sprague area of Spokane, a neighborhood known for its high levels of criminal activity and transient population. As the night wore on, the weather turned colder and wetter, adding to the bleakness of the evening. Ruby's final hours remain unclear, but it is known that she was found in a field near the intersection of Fisk and Ferry, an area that was both secluded and dimly lit. The discovery was made by a transient who stumbled upon her body. Ruby had been strangled, and the brutality of the crime was clear by the evidence left at the scene. Her body was found in a state that indicated a violent struggle. Police arrived at the scene to find Ruby's body, showing clear signs of trauma. The investigation quickly focused on the details surrounding her slaying, including the identification of potential witnesses and the collection of evidence from the crime scene. The evidence included fingerprints and DNA, although forensic technology at the time was limited. Initial interviews with potential witnesses and those familiar with Ruby did not bring any substantial leads, leaving investigators grasping for answers. As the investigation progressed, detectives noted troubling similarities between Ruby's case and a series of other unsolved slayings in the Spokane area. Over a span of months in 1986, several women, including Mary Ann Turner and Dorothy E. Burdett, were found strangled under circumstances that suggested a possible pattern. Mary Ann, a convicted prostitute, was found strangled next to a garage on South Ivory in early November. Dorothy, a 62-year-old woman with no known criminal background, was discovered in High Bridge Park on Christmas Day. The striking similarities in the method used to cut their lives short, particularly the use of strangulation, led investigators to consider whether a single perpetrator could be responsible for all these cases. Even with these connections, the investigation into Ruby's case faced significant obstacles. The conditions of that night, coupled with the sparse evidence and lack of immediate witnesses, made the investigation challenging. The forensic evidence collected was limited, and the technology of the time did not allow for comprehensive DNA analysis or provided definitive links between the cases. The police explored various theories, including the possibility of a serial perpetrator operating in the region, but were unable to find conclusive evidence to tie the cases together. The lack of significant progress and the absence of new leads gradually caused Ruby's case to grow cold. The investigation continued sporadically, but with each passing year, the chances of solving the case seemed to diminish. The breakthrough in Ruby Doss's case came more than 30 years after her brutal slaying, stemming from a seemingly unrelated investigation in a different state. By 2015, advancements in forensic technology had revolutionized the way law enforcement could analyze and match DNA evidence, providing new hope for cold cases. In a separate case, Richard Aguirre, then in his late 50s and a former police officer from Pasco, Washington, was under investigation for an assault that occurred in Franklin County. During this investigation, Aguirre's DNA was collected and entered into the National DNA Database, CODIS. In a stroke of luck, Aguirre's DNA profile was cross-referenced with DNA evidence collected from Ruby's crime scene. This pivotal match was made possible by advancements in DNA technology and the entry of evidence into the database, which had not been feasible at the time of the original investigation. The connection between Aguirre and Ruby's case was solidified when Spokane police obtained a search warrant for Aguirre's home. They collected new evidence, including items that could potentially link him to the crime. The renewed scrutiny and comparison of evidence confirmed that Aguirre was the prime suspect in Ruby's case. The discovery was a game changer. It not only identified the man responsible for Ruby's demise, but also rekindled hope for the families of other victims who had remained unsolved. After remaining unsolved for nearly 3 decades, Aguirre was arrested in June 2015 for his involvement in the slaying of Ruby Doss. The arrest was a major breakthrough for the Spokane police, who had long sought justice for Ruby and her family. Aguirre's trial began with intense scrutiny and high public interest. The prosecution presented a compelling case, highlighting the DNA evidence that linked Aguirre to the crime scene. But the trial was not without complications. The defense argued that Aguirre was not in Spokane at the time of the slaying, pointing to his military records and claiming that other DNA evidence found at the scene suggested multiple potential suspects. They contended that Aguirre's successful career as a police officer and his subsequent life should be considered in their defense. The trial took a turn when the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict, resulting in a mistrial in early 2021. Aguirre's case was retried in 2023, and he chose to waive his right to a jury trial. He opted instead for a bench trial where Spokane County Superior Court Judge Jeremy Schmidt would decide his fate. The second trial concluded with Aguirre being found guilty of first degree on December 26, 2023. The verdict came as a relief to Ruby Doss's family, who had endured years of uncertainty and grief. On March 5, 2024, Richard Aguirre was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The sentence, handed down by Judge Schmidt. Schmidt noted the brutal nature of the crime and the enduring pain experienced by Ruby's family, acknowledging that no sentence could truly fill the void left by Ruby's loss. Aguirre's defense attorney argued for a reduced sentence, emphasizing Aguirre's age at the time of the crime and his later contributions to society. They also talked about the potential vulnerabilities Aguirre would face in prison, given his background as a former law enforcement officer. Ultimately, the judge decided on the maximum allowable sentence under the 1986 laws. The sentencing was a bittersweet closure for Ruby Doss's case. While it could not undo the past or fully heal the wounds left by her tragedy, it provided a measure of justice and a sense of resolution for her family. Lashunda Doss Walker, the oldest daughter of Ruby, said, "I am not sure how much he understands that he was such an eraser. He changed the trajectory of my life and my sister's lives in such a major way." Latoya Doss, another one of Ruby Doss' daughters, said, "This is not just a loss for me, it is a generational loss for my future family members." In a turn of events that has stunned both Los Angeles and Northern California, a cold case from 1984 has suddenly reignited public interest. Found beaten and lifeless in a Roseville alley, Madeline Garcia's case went cold for decades, leaving unanswered questions that have finally found answers decades later. Madeline Garcia, born in Chico, California to Spanish immigrant parents, lived a life rich in cultural heritage and community spirit. Growing up in Rockland and East Sacramento, California, she was cherished for her warmth and generosity. After marrying Frank Garcia, she made a home in East Sacramento, where she was known for her exceptional cooking, vibrant gardens, and creative crafts. In the late 1970s, Madeline moved to South Placer, continuing her commitment to her community. She lived a quiet life, but at the age of 69, that life would be tragically cut short. On the morning of September 26, 1984, Madeline Garcia was found in an alleyway on the 300 block of Atlantic Street. Madeline, known for her early morning walks on her distinctive tricycle, had been collecting cans when she was attacked. A witness discovered her body partially concealed behind the West House Hotel and Saloon. The scene was one of unspeakable violence. She had been beaten, with the ferocity of the assault so intense that her dentures were thrown from the scene. The police who arrived on the scene were confronted with a grim discovery, as her body also bore signs of an assault. In the wake of Madeline's tragic demise, the Roseville Police Department launched an exhaustive investigation into her vicious slaying. Detectives canvassed the area, interviewing residents and tracking down any potential leads. Detective James Fujitani and evidence technician Gary DeMille Lwandori worked diligently at the crime scene, but progress was slow. The investigation was briefly redirected when a double slaying surfaced, and although Fujitani managed to secure convictions in those cases, Madeline's case remained unresolved. Years passed, and as the case grew colder, new detectives like Kurt Leatherman and Mary Green picked up the case. Leatherman, in particular, made significant strides by aligning the evidence with advancements in forensic technology and clearing numerous suspects. But even with these renewed efforts, Madeline's case remained unsolved, and the hope for resolution seemed increasingly distant. The breakthrough came decades later with advancements in DNA technology and investigative techniques. In 2024, investigators employed familial DNA testing. This technique revealed a match linking Richard Moore, a man with a history of arson near the crime scene, to the unsolved case. This new development prompted a renewed push to locate Moore, who had since relocated to Los Angeles. As the case was reactivated, the technology and persistence of investigators led to Moore's arrest on June 27, 2024. Moore was transported back to Placer County, where he faced charges involving the slaying of Madeline Garcia, as well as kidnapping and assault. Neighbors who lived by Moore in a quiet Echo Park neighborhood said they were in disbelief over the allegations, with many saying the man seemed friendly and helpful. One neighbor said, "It has been a shock to learn that something so crazy is happening with someone who we live near to. He was always pretty friendly. I rode my bicycle by one time and he asked if I needed to air my tires." Moore's initial court appearance on July 8, 2024, was the beginning of the judicial process. Moore, who entered a not guilty plea, was appointed a public defender as the case proceeded through the legal system. His arraignment set the stage for a trial that would test the strength of the evidence and the effectiveness of the new forensic methods used to crack the case. As the legal proceedings continues, Madeline's family and the Roseville community waits for a resolution. Terry Middlecoff, Madeline's oldest granddaughter, said Moore's arrest was bittersweet. She said, "It is a bittersweet moment. I can only hope my grandkids remember me the way that I remember her." The arrest not only brought renewed attention to Madeline's case, but also provided a glimmer of closure after decades of uncertainty and grief. In the quiet stretch of Seward Highway south of Anchorage, Alaska, a chilling discovery in 1978 marked the beginning of a decades-long mystery when the body of 16-year-old Shelley Connolly was discovered. The case eventually went cold, leaving her friends and family without closure, until 2019, when forensic technology finally cracked the case wide open. Born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska, Shelley Connolly was a lively and spirited teenager with a penchant for adventure and a deep connection to her family. She was petite and often described as having an unassuming beauty. Her mother later noting that Shelley did not fully appreciate how attractive she was. Despite dropping out of high school, Shelley was eager to carve out her own path. She had a passion for beauty and personal care and was set to start cosmetology courses. At just 16, she was also engaged to a man in the military stationed at Fort Richardson. January 7, 1978, began like any other day in Anchorage, Alaska. The city was shrouded in a thick fog, and it would later become seared into the memories of those that knew Shelley, and a day that her mother, Judy Connolly, would replay countless times over the year. That evening, Shelley had plans to go out. She picked out an outfit that reflected her bold personality, and despite her mother's reservations about her going out dressed in revealing clothing, Shelley threw on a ski jacket her parents had given her for Christmas and made her way to Chilkoot Charlie's, a well-known Anchorage bar. Although underage, Shelley blended into the crowd of young adults who frequented the bar. During that time, it was a hot spot, the oil boom bringing in a surge of young men with disposable incomes. Shelley was seen leaving Chilkoot Charlie's later that night in the company of several men. Witnesses later reported seeing her at Leroy's, an all-night diner on C Street, but the timeline of her movements became increasingly murky. Sometime after leaving Leroy's, Shelley's fate took a tragic turn. The next morning, two female hikers were walking along the Seward Highway when something caught their eye down an embankment near the train tracks. What they initially thought might be discarded trash or debris turned out to be something far more horrifying. Lying motionless in the snow, they found the body of Shelley Connolly. Her petite frame was partially covered in the fresh snow. The girls immediately alerted the authorities, and soon the Alaska State Troopers were on the scene. They quickly secured the area as investigators from the Alaska Bureau of Investigation arrived. The state medical examiner would later determine that Shelley had suffered a brutal assault before being left in the frigid Alaskan winter. She had been beaten, and her body bore the signs of a vicious attack. Ultimately, it was a combination of internal injuries, including a ruptured spleen and exposure to the freezing temperatures that claimed her life. Evidence suggested that after she was assaulted, Shelley had been thrown from a moving car. Her hand became trapped in the door, and the vehicle dragged her some distance before her assailants realized what had happened. When they stopped the car and freed her, they callously discarded her over the side of the embankment, deserting her in the cold of the night. There were faint marks in the snow signs that she had tried to crawl up after being thrown out of the vehicle. Initial efforts focused on piecing together the events leading up to Shelley's tragic demise. Troopers interviewed witnesses, including patrons of Chilkoot Charlie's and Leroy's Diner, trying to trace her movements from the night before. Despite numerous interviews and efforts to reconstruct her last hours, the investigation hit a series of ends. The Alaska State Troopers quickly realized that the case would require more advanced forensic techniques. By 1997, with forensic DNA technology becoming a viable tool for solving cases, the Alaska Scientific Crime Detection Laboratory began developing a DNA profile from the biological evidence collected during Shelley's autopsy. This profile aimed to match the unidentified suspect's DNA with known profiles in CODIS. In 2003, the DNA profile from Shelley's case was uploaded into CODIS. Even with this step forward in the right direction, there was no match found, and the investigation remained at a standstill. The case was reopened and evidence re-examined multiple times throughout the years, yielding no new leads. It was not until 2019 that investigators finally got a break in the cold case. In early 2019, the Alaska State Troopers Cold Case Unit turned to genetic genealogy for new insights. This innovative forensic technique involves submitting a DNA profile from the crime scene to Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company specializing in DNA analysis and genealogy. Parabon Nanolabs compared the DNA profile from Shelley's case to profiles in public genealogical databases, such as GEDmatch. They identified a man named Donald F. McQuaid as a person of interest based on genetic connections to the DNA profile. The results indicated that McQuaid, who was 21 years old at the time of Shelley's slaying, was a likely suspect. Following this identification, Alaska State Troopers conducted a thorough investigation to confirm the link. They obtained a DNA sample from McQuaid and compared it with the evidence collected from Shelley's autopsy. The match was conclusive. DNA samples collected from 2 locations on Shelley's body matched McQuaid's DNA profile. The breakthrough led to McQuaid's arrest in September 2019. It was a pivotal moment in the case, bringing renewed hope to Shelley Connolly's family and the community. Shelley's mother, Judy, said that she felt many emotions when she was told that her daughter's perpetrator was finally found. She said, "Happiness that they found him. Sad too. 41 years, so this was totally unexpected." The evidence against McQuaid was compelling. The DNA match firmly linked him to the crime scene, and further investigation verified that he had been in Alaska in 1978, aligning with the timeline of the slaying. The legal proceedings that followed were intensive. McQuaid faced charges of first degree and second degree. The case was prosecuted by Assistant Attorneys General Aaron McCarthy and Paige Smothers, who worked diligently to present a thorough case to the court. The prosecution emphasized the severity of the crime and the profound impact on Shelley's family, seeking a sentence that reflected both the gravity of the offense and McQuaid's advanced age. On April 26, 2024, Superior Court Judge Andrew Peterson sentenced McQuaid to 50 years in prison for the slaying of Shelley Connolly. In his sentencing remarks, Judge Peterson underscored the seriousness of the crime and the long-awaited justice for Shelley and her family. He noted that while McQuaid had lived a full life and seen his children grow up, Shelley's family had been denied those years with her. The sentencing was an emotional moment for the Connolly family, who had waited over 4 decades for this resolution. They expressed a mixture of relief and sorrow, knowing that while justice had been served, it could never fully compensate for the loss of Shelley. Shelley's mom, Judy, said, "Whatever the new technology is, I am just so glad that it came around and it solved this crime, and hopefully it will solve other crimes for different unsolved cases."